If you've never ridden a motorcycle before and you want to start riding dirt bikes, or if you've got 30 years of street experience and want to start riding dirt bikes, there's a few common mistakes that people tend to make as soon as they get on one of these things. The first mistake everyone makes is sitting way too far back. People like to sit on a motorcycle as if they're sitting on their couch, where they just put their butt down and have their legs, their shins basically straight off the edge kind of thing. So you've got this platform and then down to the floor kind of idea. And that's simply a bad position for a dirt bike. When you're riding along, if you hit a bump, the suspension does soak things up nicely, but it's still going to have some impact on the bike. You hit a log or even a little bump, and the rear wheel will come up. The suspension absorbs some of that, but the rest of that goes up into the bike. And if you're sitting back here and you hit a bump, you're going to get bounced around. The right place to sit is basically with your butt straight above the foot pegs. That way you're in a nice neutral position. The bike can move around and bounce around underneath you, and it's okay. You can just let the bike move. You won't get jolted nearly as much sitting in this position as you will with your butt back here. Sitting forward is great for turns. Keeps weight on the front wheel and helps the front wheel keep traction as you go around turns, but for the most part, if you're just riding along and you're seated, this is the right spot to be in. Keep your toes in. You can move forward to get the brake and the shifter. Don't have them hanging out like this. That's a good way to catch your feet on stuff. The other thing I see from beginners is a lot of people will just dangle their foot while they're going around a turn. That's a really great way to hurt yourself. When you're riding on trails, there's lots of logs and roots and rocks and things like that for you to catch your foot on. I know that people think they're going to catch themselves if they start to tip over, but most beginners aren't turning nearly sharp enough to even have to worry about that most of the time. If you are concerned about it and you feel like you need to get your foot off the peg, put your foot out forward like that. At least keep it forward. That way, if you do end up having to put your foot down and catch the bike, you're going to put your heel into the ground rather than your toe. If you catch your toe and put a bunch of weight on that while you're going through a turn, it's really easy to get it twisted up and hurt your ankle and your knee. At least the foot can come down, you can catch yourself, give yourself a little bit of a bounce to right the bike if you feel like you're going to crash without having to worry about twisting up your ankle and your knee. As far as throttle control goes, same as any bike, you want to have your hand and your wrist basically parallel to the ground. You don't want to be up like this. You do that, you accidentally give it too much gas, then all of a sudden you're going backwards and giving it a ton of gas. So you want your hand to be parallel to the ground. Clutch on a dirt bike, use it a lot. Get used to where it just starts to grab and get really comfortable with that. The other thing people tend to do all the time is worry about burning out their clutch. You're not going to burn out your clutch when you first start riding. Feel free to use that friction zone to your advantage. It'll keep you from spinning the wheel. The wheel spin and stalling is a big concern, so use that friction zone. Feel free to play in that as you're trying to get going, especially on slippery stuff and rocks and hills. The bike is going to move around underneath you a lot. Dirt bikes are always hitting uneven surfaces, bouncing off of rocks and things like that. You have to get comfortable with that. You have to be able to stay relaxed and let the bike move under you. If you're super tense on the bars, you're going to get into a lot of trouble. You're going to have the bike bouncing around and then you being too stiff to deal with it. You want your hands on the bars, you want your fingers on the clutch and brake, and you want to have the elbows out, but you're not trying to death grip the bars. You got to keep it relaxed still. You want to let the bike move around a little bit under you. So for most beginners and most people coming from the street, sitting is going to be your default. You're going to want to do that. It's going to feel more comfortable. But standing up is better on the dirt bike. You want to get used to standing, and the earlier you get used to that idea, the better off you're going to be, the less trouble you're going to get into, and the easier it is for you to ride well. So the standing position is balls of your feet on the peg and your knees basically straight up from that. You want to be able to balance on the bike without using your arms to hold you in place. Now, obviously from this position, if I give it gas, I'm just going to go backwards. I'm not braced against anything at all. And if I slow down, I'm going to go forwards. So this isn't the great position. This is a great place to start though, and then from here, you bend your knees, you bend your waist, and you just bring yourself down lower. You use your shoulders forward and your butt back to maintain your balance. The more aggressively you ride, the lower you're likely to get, but you want to be able to balance without using your arms to hold you in place. Keep looking where you want to go. Use your arms to control the bike, but don't have a death grip on it. And you don't need that. You don't want to have to be using your arms to keep you in place on the bike either. If I accelerate, I can lean forward a little bit to counter that momentum. And if I'm braking or going downhill, I can lean back a little bit. Keeps myself on the bike without having to work my arms. Your arms will get very tired very quickly if you're trying to hang on to the bike. So squeeze with your ankles and your knees. Butt out. Shoulders forward, eyes up, looking where you want to go. And again, even from this position, you still want your wrists to be flat, parallel to the ground. Otherwise, you'll still end up with that whiskey throttle situation, go bouncing down the trail without any control. This is one of the reasons I like to have my levers up so high, is it makes me put my hands in the correct position. So crouch down the more aggressive you want to get, or stay relatively relaxed, just hanging out for a ride. And from the standing position, the bike can move around as much as it wants, and my head doesn't have to move at all. So you have better control of the bike, you know where you're going, you're not getting bounced around and having trouble focusing on your trail. The bike can move as much as it wants. I'm just nice and balanced and level. New riders should be working on getting comfortable with standing as quickly as possible. I like the idea of just practicing on a stand like this so that you can sort out that right position and get a feel for it. It's going to make your life way easier as far as just riding well goes and keeping yourself out of trouble. The standing position allows you to weight the different wheels a lot easier. You can put weight on the front wheel, you can put weight on the rear wheel, you can move the bike around, you can let the bike move under you, you can do a lot of things with a lot less effort if you're in the right position. It may seem counterintuitive, but it's actually a lot easier to get your foot on the ground and balance the bike if you're standing. And it's a lot easier to get out of the way of the bike if you're falling over from a standing position rather than sitting down. If I'm sitting and I'm starting to feel like I'm going to tip over, there's a little bit of a hole here and I can barely reach. I can barely get my foot down into that spot. Whereas if I'm going from a standing position, I can easily just let my thigh sit on the seat and get my foot down. Even if I have to drop my foot into a big pit, I can still get there. A lot of times when you first start riding, you're going to find that the spots where you have trouble is where you're transitioning from down to back up or going over rough terrain, and oftentimes you'll have your rear tire on a high spot and your front tire on a high spot, and your foot has to go somewhere in the middle. You won't be able to reach that if you're sitting, but if you're standing, you can easily just drop your foot into that spot and keep your thigh on the seat. I've got my knee right up in the seat. I can't even actually reach the peg. Right now I can barely touch it, but I can still balance the bike. The other good thing about standing is if you're getting into trouble and you are falling over, you can just get your foot out, balance on the other peg, and put the bike on the ground. People fall over and land underneath their bike when they're sitting. Riding a dirt bike is a lot more physically demanding than riding on the street. And the first few rides you do, you will probably get very tired very quickly. But the more you condition yourself for riding in the dirt, and the more work you do to ride with the right posture and the right control of the bike, the easier everything gets. Fitness is important, but correct riding is better as far as maintaining energy and being able to keep riding for long periods of time and long distances. The faster you go, the harder the trails you're on, the more work it's going to be. But again, the easier it is if you're not in the wrong position to begin with. So that's the pure basics of riding the dirt bike. Keep yourself nice and balanced. Keep your weight fairly neutral on the bike, except for when you need it somewhere else. If you want traction on the rear tire, you can slide back a bit, put some weight on the rear. But for the most part, you're going to want to stay neutral. And ideally, you're going to want to be standing.